My name is Layla Roberts, and I'm 32 years old. Until I was 8, I thought I had the perfect family, loving parents, beautiful home, and a future full of promise. Then one day, my father walked out with barely an explanation. For 24 years, I believed my mother's story, that he simply couldn't handle family life. But last month, I found a letter hidden away that changed everything I thought I knew about my parents. The truth wasn't just shocking. It completely reversed the roles of villain and victim in my family story. If you've ever discovered a family secret that turned your world upside down, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you're joining me today, and let me know where you're watching from. The memories of my childhood before everything fell apart still have a dreamlike quality. My father, Thomas Roberts, was tall with kind eyes and a laugh that made everyone around him smile. He worked as an architect at a respected firm in Portland, and I remember being so proud when he would show me his building designs. He'd sit me on his lap at his drafting table at home and guide my small hand with his teaching me how to draw straight lines and perfect circles. In the evenings, he'd coach my soccer team, cheering louder than any other parent when I scored a goal. My mother, Diana, taught 3rd grade at my elementary school. The other kids would always tell me how lucky I was to have her as my mom. She was the teacher everyone wanted, known for her creative projects and the little treats she'd bring in for special occasions. She volunteered for everything: PTA president, community garden organizer, fundraiser coordinator. From the outside, she seemed like the perfect mother, attentive, loving, involved in every aspect of my life. We lived in a beautiful 2-story colonial house with blue shutters on a tree-lined street in the suburbs of Portland. It had a big backyard with a tire swing my father hung from the old oak tree. In spring, Mom would plant tulips along the front walkway, and in summer, we'd have barbecues where all the neighbors would gather. I had my own room upstairs with walls painted sunshine yellow because Dad said it matched my personality. Our family had so many traditions that made me feel secure. Every Sunday morning, Dad would make his famous blueberry pancakes, flipping them high in the air to make me giggle. One weekend each month, we'd pack up our camping gear and head to the mountains or the coast, depending on the season. Dad would teach me about stars, while Mom told ghost stories around the campfire. Game nights were every Thursday. Mom was ruthless at Monopoly, while Dad always let me win at checkers, though he pretended it was because I was getting better. My 7th birthday stands out as particularly magical. Dad built a dollhouse that was an exact replica of our home, down to the blue shutters and the tire swing. Mom organized a scavenger hunt throughout our neighborhood, with clues that led me and my friends on an adventure that ended with a treasure chest of chocolate coins in our backyard. They rented a cotton candy machine, and I remember the sticky sweetness on my fingers as I opened presents surrounded by friends. I can still feel the wobble of my bicycle when Dad took off the training wheels. He ran alongside me down our street, his hand steady on the back of the seat. "I've got you, Layla," he kept saying, until the moment he didn't, and I was riding on my own, for the first time, the wind in my hair, his cheers fading behind me as I pedaled faster. Our family photos told the story of perfect happiness: vacations at Disney World, Christmas mornings in matching pajamas, backyard birthday parties. In every picture, we were smiling often, hugging the very image of a loving family. These photos would later become painful to look at. But back then, they were accurate reflections of what I thought was our reality. Yet there were small things, details I only recognized as significant in retrospect. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and hear them arguing in low, tense voices. Mom would occasionally disappear for a weekend, and Dad would tell me she was at a teacher conference or visiting an old friend. There were phone calls that would make her step outside to talk, and times when Dad's smile seemed forced. The last perfect day came just a week before everything changed. It was a Saturday in October, crisp and bright with autumn colors. We went apple-picking, climbing ladders into the fragrant branches, filling our baskets with Red Delicious and Honeycrisp. Mom made caramel for dipping when we got home, and we sat on the porch steps, the sweet stickiness coating our chins as Dad told funny stories about his college days. I remember Mom laughing so hard she snorted something she usually considered undignified. Dad put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. I sat between them, sticky and content, unaware that our family was balanced on a precipice. As the sun set, casting long shadows across our lawn, Dad took a photo of Mom and me on the porch steps. I've kept that photo all these years, the last image of me as a child who believed in perfect families. In it, Mom is looking at the camera, her smile beautiful, but her eyes holding something I couldn't recognize then. Now I think it might have been fear. That evening, after I went to bed, I heard them talking again in those serious, hushed tones. I fell asleep, wondering what adults could have to talk about that was so important, never imagining that within days, our family would be irreparably broken. The perfect family was an illusion that was about to shatter, leaving me to piece together a new reality from the fragments. October 15th is burned into my memory as the day everything changed. It started like any normal Tuesday. Dad made me breakfast toast with peanut butter cut into triangles just how I liked it and walked me to the bus stop. He hugged me a little longer than usual, and I remember being slightly embarrassed as the school bus pulled up. "Be good, sunshine," he said, using his special nickname for me. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Love you too, Dad," I replied, already climbing the bus steps, my mind on the spelling test I had that day. School was ordinary. Mom was teaching in her classroom down the hall, and I saw her briefly at lunch. She seemed distracted, but smiled when she saw me asking about the spelling test and reminding me that she'd pick me up after school instead of me taking the bus home. When the final bell rang, I found Mom waiting in her car. Something was off immediately. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly. She didn't turn on the radio like she usually did, and when I asked if we could stop for ice cream, she just shook her head without explanation. Walking into our house felt strange. It was too quiet. Dad's keys weren't in the bowl by the door where they always were. His jacket wasn't on the hook. "Go wash up and have your snack," Mom said, her voice too high, too brittle. "I need to make a phone call." I was at the kitchen table with my apple slices and homework when she finally sat down across from me. Her face looked different, somehow older and scared. "Layla, sweetie," she began, reaching for my hands. "I need to tell you something important. Daddy's gone." I didn't understand at first. "Gone where? When is he coming back?" She squeezed my hands, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's not coming back, sweetie. He's left us. He packed his things while we were at school, and he's gone." The apple slice in my mouth turned to cardboard. I couldn't swallow. "But why did I do something wrong?" "No, no!" She pulled me into a hug that smelled of her flowery perfume and salt from her tears. "It's nothing you did. Your father he couldn't handle being a father and husband anymore. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that hurt other people because they're only thinking about themselves." I pulled away, certain there was a mistake. "Can we call him? Maybe he just needed a break. Maybe he'll come back tomorrow." We tried calling. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, my voice getting smaller each time. "Dad, it's me. Please come home. I miss you. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it." He never called back. The first week I waited by the window every day after school, watching for his car to pull into the driveway. I checked the mail obsessively, certain he would at least send a letter explaining. Mom found me asleep by the front door one night, curled up with my blanket and teddy bear waiting. My 9th birthday came 6 weeks after he left. A card arrived with $20 inside. The message, written in his familiar handwriting, said only, "Happy birthday, Layla. Love, Dad." No explanation, no phone number, no promise to visit. I cried myself to sleep, clutching that card. Over the following months, Mom carefully constructed a narrative about my father. "Your dad loves you in his way," she would say, "but some men just aren't cut out for family life. He was always independent, always restless. I should have seen the signs." My friends didn't know what to say to me. They would invite me over, and I'd see their complete families, fathers helping with homework or tossing footballs in the backyard, and it would hit me all over again what I had lost. My teachers gave me concerned looks and treated me with a gentleness that made me feel even more different. At school, I overheard whispers. "That's the girl whose dad just took off. I heard he has another family now. My mom says he never pays child support." That last bit wasn't true. Every month a check would arrive, always for more than the court-ordered amount. But there was never a note, never a phone call. Just money, as if that could substitute for his presence. My anger grew alongside my sense of abandonment. I started calling him Thomas in my head instead of Dad. I tore his face out of family photos, then felt guilty, and taped them back together in secret. I crafted elaborate fantasies about him begging to come home, and me coldly rejecting him, making him feel the pain he'd caused me. The first Christmas without him, Mom tried to compensate by buying too many presents. We invited her parents to stay with us, and they were extra cheerful in that forced way adults use when they're trying to cover up sadness. We started new traditions, Chinese food for Christmas Eve dinner, opening one present at midnight. Mom hung both our stockings, but not his. When I asked about it, she said, "We're a new family now, Layla. Just you and me against the world." That phrase, "just you and me against the world," became her mantra. She'd repeat it when I was sad, when I asked about Dad, when I complained about how different our life had become. It was both comforting and suffocating. I understood early on that my grief was a burden to her, that she needed me to be okay, so she could be okay too. So I learned to keep my questions about my father to myself. I stopped checking the mail. I put his photos in a shoebox under my bed instead of on display. I became what my mother needed me to be, the daughter who was resilient, who understood, who didn't need her father. But every night, I'd whisper into my pillow the questions I couldn't ask out loud. Why wasn't I enough for him to stay? What made leaving so easy? And the question that would haunt me for years to come: what was the real reason he left us behind? Adolescence hit me like a hurricane, bringing with it new layers of complexity to my father's absence. By 13, I had constructed an identity around being abandoned. It shaped everything from my cautious approach to friendships to the way I deliberately chose hobbies different from anything my father had enjoyed. My mother's parenting style changed dramatically after he left. The formerly free-spirited teacher became overprotective, needing to know where I was every minute. She would call my friends' parents to verify plans, imposed earlier curfews than anyone else had, and developed an almost paranoid fear about my safety. "I'm all you have," she would remind me, "and you're all I have." Her anxiety transferred to me in subtle ways. I became the responsible one, often feeling more like the parent than the child. I would check that doors were locked at night, remind her about bills, and even started cooking dinners when I noticed she would sometimes forget to eat while grading papers. Dating was another area where Mom's behavior seemed erratic. She would cycle through relationships never lasting more than a few months. The men were always different types: an accountant with a passion for jazz, a carpenter who made us beautiful bookshelves, a history teacher from her school with a quiet demeanor. None of them felt like potential stepfathers, more like Mom's attempts to fill some void. Whenever these relationships ended, she would increase her commentary about my father. "Men always leave when things get difficult," she would say while washing dishes. Or, "Trust is earned, not given, Layla." Your father taught us that the hard way. These little drops of poison shaped my understanding of relationships before I'd even had one. Every year on my birthday, Dad's card would arrive. The messages never varied much: generic well wishes, a larger check as I got older, and always signed "Love, Dad." Never an invitation to visit, never a phone number, never an explanation. I started to see these cards as obligations rather than genuine connection attempts. When I was 14, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I found my father's address on one of the envelope return labels and wrote him a letter full of all the questions and accusations I'd been storing up. 2 weeks later, he called. Mom was out at a school meeting, and I answered the phone. "Layla?" His voice was exactly as I remembered, which seemed unfair somehow. "I got your letter." The conversation was excruciating. I had rehearsed all my cutting remarks, my demand for explanations, but faced with his actual voice, I turned monosyllabic. "How's school?" he asked. "Fine. Your letter said you're playing volleyball now." "Yeah. I'd love to see you sometime, Layla, if you want." I remember the surge of hope followed immediately by fear. "I don't think Mom would like that." He sighed. "She doesn't have to know. I could pick you up from school sometime." Something in me rebelled at the secrecy. "I have to go," I said, and hung up. When Mom came home, I didn't tell her about the call. But I did ask, "Why doesn't Dad ever try to see me?" She set down her bag slowly. "I've never stopped him, Layla. He knows where we live. He makes his choices." After that, I stopped reaching out. I built my identity around academic achievement instead. If I couldn't be loved by my father, I would be recognized for my intelligence. I graduated middle school with highest honors and entered high school with a determination to excel at everything. My high school years were a study in overcompensation. I joined every club, took all advanced placement classes, ran for student council. The underlying message in everything I did was clear. Look what you're missing. Look how amazing I am without you. I had my first serious boyfriend at 16. Jack came from what seemed like the perfect family. Parents still married after 20 years, Sunday dinners with grandparents, 2 doting older brothers. I was drawn to their stability like a moth to flame, often finding excuses to be at his house. His father, a dentist named Bill, would help us with chemistry homework and tell Dad jokes that made everyone groan. Watching Jack roll his eyes at his father's antics, I felt a jealousy so acute it was physical. Jack and I dated for almost a year before breaking up when he left for college. The breakup hurt, but losing my connection to his family hurt more. It had given me a glimpse of what I was missing, what continued to elude me. Meanwhile, my relationship with Mom intensified. She often referred to us as best friends rather than mother and daughter. We had movie nights where we'd analyze characters' choices, shopping trips where she'd want us to dress similarly, and long conversations where she'd share inappropriate details about her dating life. It felt flattering to be treated as an equal, but also overwhelming, as if I had to be her emotional support system. When college application season arrived, I noticed my mother's ambivalence. She would help me research schools, but always highlight the ones closest to home. She would talk about how much she'd miss me, how empty the house would feel, how worried she was about my safety on faraway campuses. High school graduation was a milestone that brought my father's absence into sharp relief again. As I sat in my cap and gown scanning the audience, I allowed myself one small fantasy that he might surprise me by showing up. He didn't, of course. There was another card, another check. This one, significantly larger, meant for college expenses, and a brief note saying he was proud of me. Mom took dozens of photos, just the 2 of us, her arm around my shoulders. Both of us smiling, as if nothing was missing. That night, as I lay in bed, surrounded by graduation gifts and cards from everyone except the one person I most wanted acknowledgement from, I made a decision. College would be my fresh start. I would go far enough away to establish independence from Mom's well-intentioned but suffocating love. I would build a life that wasn't defined by who had left me behind, but by who I chose to become. In the morning, I told Mom I had decided on University of Washington in Seattle, a 4-hour drive from Portland. Far enough for independence, close enough for weekend visits. The look on her face was complicated pride warring with abandonment. In that moment, our roles reversed, and I realized with startling clarity she was afraid I would leave her, just as my father had. My college years at University of Washington marked my first real taste of independence. Seattle was different enough from Portland to feel like a new beginning, but close enough that I could drive home when guilt about leaving my mother alone became overwhelming. I chose to major in psychology, a decision directly influenced by my own family trauma. I was fascinated by attachment theory, by the ways early abandonment shapes adult relationships, by the complex dynamics between parents and children. In my essays, I would analyze my own experiences, turning personal pain into academic discourse as a way to distance myself from it. Living in a dorm with other young women showed me how common family fractures were. My roommate Alana hadn't spoken to her mother in years. The girl across the hall shuttled between divorced parents who still used her as a weapon against each other. My friend Taylor had been raised by grandparents after losing both parents in an accident. Our late-night conversations in the common room often turned into impromptu therapy sessions, all of us trying to make sense of the families that had shaped us. The physical distance from my mother created emotional breathing room. Our daily phone calls gradually decreased to weekly, then bi-weekly. I could feel her anxiety through the phone lines, her questions probing for reassurance that I wasn't pulling away permanently. I learned to manage her emotions from afar, to provide enough connection to soothe her while still building my separate life. In my sophomore year, I met James in my research methods class. Tall with glasses and a serious demeanor that broke into surprising humor, he pursued me with a patience I wasn't used to. Our relationship developed slowly. Study sessions that turned into coffee dates that extended into dinners, conversations that lasted until dawn. James came from a blended family his parents had divorced when he was young, both remarried, giving him step-siblings and complex holiday schedules. He understood family complications in a way many others didn't. When I finally told him the full story about my father leaving, he didn't offer platitudes or judgment. He simply asked, "Have you ever considered reaching out to him again, now that you're an adult?" The question planted a seed. By then, I was 19, old enough to make my own decisions about family relationships. Through my mother, I had my father's email address. He sent her updates when it changed part of their minimal co-parenting communication. After weeks of drafting and deleting, I sent him a short message. "I'm studying at UW. Would like to meet sometime if you're willing." His response came within hours. "I would like that very much. Whenever you're ready." We arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between Seattle and the small coastal town where he lived. I prepared myself thoroughly dressed in a way that projected confidence, brought a list of questions in my journal, arrived early to secure a corner table with a good view of the door. When he walked in, the years collapsed. He looked older, of course, hair graying at the temples, lines around his eyes, but unmistakably my father. He hesitated at the entrance, searching the room, and the uncertainty in his posture made him seem vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Layla," he said when he reached my table, my name coming out like a sigh of relief. "You look so grown up." The conversation was stilted at first. We covered safe topics, my classes, his work as an architect for a small firm, specializing in environmentally sustainable buildings, the unusually warm weather. I could feel the weight of unasked questions between us. Finally, I gathered my courage. "Why did you really leave, and why didn't you fight to stay in my life?" He looked down at his coffee, turning the cup slowly. Your mother and I had problems that went beyond normal marital issues. I made the decision I thought would cause the least damage to you. By disappearing, by sending cards with no explanation year after year. I wanted to be in your life, Layla. I asked for joint custody. Your mother fought it, and she had... He paused, choosing his words carefully. She had leverage that made it difficult for me to push harder without causing you pain. I felt a flash of anger. What does that even mean? What leverage? That's not my story to tell. If your mother hasn't shared certain things with you, I don't want to be the one to change your relationship with her. His refusal to explain further only intensified my frustration. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. As we parted, he hugged me awkward and brief and said, "I'm here when you're ready. I've always been here." Back at school, I intensified my therapy sessions. My therapist, Dr. Winters, helped me process the complicated emotions the meeting had stirred up. Estranged parent relationships often involve narratives from both sides, she explained. Finding your own truth might mean holding space for contradicting stories. Over the next 2 years, I maintained limited contact with my father. Occasional emails, a brief coffee meeting when I was in his area for a school project. He never pushed for more than I was willing to give, respecting boundaries I hadn't even articulated. It was both a relief and a frustration, his careful distance reinforcing the narrative I'd grown up with about his willingness to let me go. When graduation approached, I sent him an invitation without telling my mother. Part of me expected him to find an excuse not to come. Instead, he replied immediately, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." On graduation day, as I scanned the audience before walking across the stage, I spotted him in the back row. He was alone, wearing a suit, his face a mixture of pride and sadness. Our eyes met briefly before I had to move forward with my row. By the time the ceremony ended and I fought through the crowd to where he had been sitting, he was gone. On my chair back in the graduate seating area, I found a small gift bag containing a delicate silver compass pendant and a note. "So you always find your way. Congratulations, Layla. Love, Dad." I wore the compass to my first job interview at a Seattle marketing firm, touching it like a talisman during difficult questions. When I got the position social media manager for a company that promoted sustainable businesses, I sent him a short email sharing the news. His reply was enthusiastic but respectful of the distance I maintained. Seattle became my home. I built a circle of friends who became my chosen family, people who knew me as I was, not as the product of an abandonment narrative. I dated casually but cautiously, always alert for signs that a partner might leave when things got difficult. James and I had broken up amicably before graduation, but remained friends, occasionally meeting for coffee to catch up on each other's lives. My relationship with my mother evolved into something more balanced as the years passed. I visited Portland every few months, staying in my old bedroom that remained frozen in time like a shrine to my adolescence. Mom continued teaching, joined a book club, adopted a cat named Fitzgerald. On the surface, she seemed content with her independent life, but I noticed how she would find reasons to extend my visits, the slight tension in her voice when I mentioned Seattle friends or activities that didn't include her. As for my father, I kept him in a carefully constructed box, occasional emails, birthday phone calls, a relationship that existed in narrow, controlled interactions. I told myself it was enough, that this limited connection protected me from further hurt, while satisfying my curiosity about who he was. What I didn't realize was how thoroughly I had accepted my mother's version of our family history. Despite my psychology training and therapy, I never seriously questioned the fundamental story my father had chosen to leave, had prioritized his freedom over his family, had been unwilling to fight for me. It was the foundation upon which I had built my understanding of myself. And then came the phone call that would unravel everything. "Layla, it's about your mother." The call came on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing for a client meeting. My Aunt Susan, my mother's younger sister who lived in California, and whom I rarely heard from, sounded uncharacteristically serious. What happened? Is she okay? I gripped my phone tighter, already reaching for my laptop to check flights. She's been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. She's going to need surgery and then chemo. I'm flying up tomorrow, but Layla, she's going to need you. The next 48 hours passed in a blur, canceling work commitments, packing hastily the 4-hour drive back to Portland, with my mind racing between practical concerns and emotional dread. By the time I arrived at the house I'd grown up in, my aunt had already taken over cleaning and organizing with nervous energy. Mom looked small in her bed, her usual vibrancy dimmed. When she saw me, she tried to sit up to project strength. "It's not as bad as Susan made it sound," she insisted. "The doctors caught it relatively early. The prognosis is good with treatment." But the paperwork scattered on her nightstand told a different story. Surgeon consultations, chemotherapy protocols, home care options. This wasn't a minor health scare. This was serious enough that my independent, self-sufficient mother had already called her sister for help. The following weeks established a new routine. I took a leave of absence from work, moved back into my childhood bedroom, and transformed into my mother's primary caregiver. The surgery came first, a major procedure that removed her ovaries, fallopian tubes, and uterus. The recovery was brutal, with Mom battling both physical pain and the emotional weight of the changes to her body. As she healed enough to begin chemotherapy, I took on managing the household. Between hospital visits and pharmacy runs, I sorted through years of accumulated paperwork, organized her finances, and tried to create some order in a house that had become chaotic during her illness. That's when I found the key. It was in her jewelry box, small and old-fashioned, with no identifying tag or marking. When I asked her about it, she waved it off as probably an old locker key and changed the subject. Something in her dismissal felt off, too quick, too casual. A week later, while organizing her financial documents, I found a statement from Portland Federal Bank showing annual payments for a safe deposit box. The box number was written in my mother's neat handwriting on a Post-it note stuck to the statement 247. The key. The safe deposit box. The secret. I shouldn't have gone without telling her. I know that now. But something in me, the psychologist perhaps, or simply the daughter who had lived with half-truths for decades, needed to know what was important enough to keep locked away. The bank manager was hesitant at first, but my power of attorney documentation set up for medical decisions was enough to grant me access. The metal box was larger than I expected, and heavier too, as the manager placed it on the private table in a small room. "Take your time," he said, closing the door behind him. With trembling hands, I turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs, and envelopes, all neatly organized. On top was a manila folder labeled Thomas Custody Agreement. I opened it first. Legal documents outlined a joint custody arrangement directly contradicting my mother's claim that my father had abandoned me and never sought visitation. There were court filings showing my mother had fought the arrangement, had filed multiple motions to limit his access. The final judgment granted him only supervised visits and specific holiday time. Beneath this folder was another labeled Financial Agreements. Inside was a record of payments, not just the child support I knew about, but additional sums my father had contributed for my education, healthcare, and other expenses. Far more than I had ever been told about. The third folder contained photographs, dozens of them, showing a younger version of my mother with a man I didn't recognize, and 2 small children, a boy and a girl. On the back of one photo was written, Diana Stephen Emma 7 and Michael 5, summer 2000. My hands began to shake more violently. The date didn't make sense. In 2000, I was 8 years old, and my parents had been married for nearly a decade. Who were these children? Who was Stephen? The final item in the box was a sealed envelope addressed to my mother in my father's handwriting. The postmark was dated 1 week before he left us. The envelope had been opened, the letter inside unfolded, and refolded many times based on the wear of the creases. I hesitated before reading it, aware I was crossing a line into my parents' private history. But I had come too far to stop now. Diana, the letter began. I've discovered the truth about your past about Stephen and the children in Baltimore. I understand now why you've been disappearing for weekends, why there are calls you take in private, why money has been missing from our accounts. My breath caught as I continued reading. I cannot continue living in a marriage built on such fundamental lies. The fact that you had another family before me is not the issue. It's that you've kept them a secret for our entire relationship, that you've been sending money and making visits while pretending to be at teaching conferences. It's that you have 2 children. You've never mentioned children who apparently believe you're dead based on what their father told me when I finally confronted him. The letter continued, growing more pointed, more angry. You have 1 week to tell Layla the truth, an age-appropriate version, but the truth nonetheless. She deserves to know she has half-siblings. She deserves to know why you're often absent. If you cannot be honest with our daughter, then I will leave. I refuse to participate in this web of deception any longer. If you force me out, I'll respect your wish to keep your secrets, but only because I don't want Layla hurt in the crossfire. Think carefully about what kind of mother you want to be, one who owns her past, or one who continues living a double life at the expense of her child's trust. The letter was signed simply, Thomas. I sat frozen in the bank's consultation room, the evidence of a completely different reality spread before me. My father hadn't abandoned us because he couldn't handle family life. He had left because my mother had a secret first family she had abandoned, including 2 children. He had given her an ultimatum to tell the truth, and when she refused, he had left rather than continue the deception. And in leaving, he had allowed her to paint him as the villain, had taken on that role to protect me from a more painful truth. My mother had walked away from her first 2 children, had constructed an entirely new life with us, had been living a double life for years. The room seemed to spin around me. I carefully replaced everything in the safe deposit box except the letter and 1 photograph showing my mother with her first family. These I slipped into my purse before locking the box and returning it to the bank manager. The drive home was a blur. I parked in front of our house but couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I sat in my car, reading and rereading the letter, staring at the photograph of these strangers who were my blood relatives. When I finally entered the house, Mom was in the living room, looking better than she had in days. She smiled when she saw me. Then her expression changed as she registered my face. Layla, what's wrong? I placed the letter and photograph on the coffee table between us. Her face drained of color as she recognized them. Where did you get these? She whispered. The safe deposit box. I found the key. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat controlled. I think you need to tell me the truth, Mom. All of it. The silence stretched between us, heavy with decades of secrets. Mom stared at the photograph, her fingers hovering over it without quite touching, as if it might burn her. You had no right, she finally said, her voice barely audible. Neither did you, I responded, surprising myself with the steadiness in my tone. You had no right to lie to me my entire life. You had no right to turn Dad into the villain of our story when he was the one who wanted honesty. She closed her eyes, leaning back against the couch cushions. The afternoon light coming through the windows highlighted how illness had thinned. Her face deepened the lines around her mouth. For a moment, I felt a stab of guilt confronting her while she was so vulnerable seemed cruel. But the weight of 24 years of deception pushed me forward. Who are they? I asked, pointing to the photograph. Emma and Michael, your other children. She flinched at their names. Yes. The admission seemed to deflate her further. My first children. And Stephen, my first husband. Her eyes remained closed. I was 19 when we married. By 22, I had 2 children and a life I felt trapped in. I waited, letting the silence prompt her to continue. I grew up in Baltimore in a strict religious household. College wasn't an option for girls in our community. We were expected to marry young and start families. Stephen was from church 5 years older, already established in his father's insurance business. It seemed like a good match. She opened her eyes, looking not at me, but at some distant point beyond the living room wall. The reality was different. Stephen wasn't abusive in ways anyone would recognize, but he was controlling, rigid. Our life was suffocating: church 3 times a week, dinner with his parents every Sunday, no decisions I could make without his approval, not even what color to paint the nursery. So you just left them, your own children? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. Her face hardened slightly. You can't understand what it was like, Layla. I was barely more than a child myself, with no education, no work experience, completely dependent on a man who treated me like a possession. I started taking classes at the community college in secret, using grocery money. When I got accepted to Portland State with a scholarship, I saw it as my only escape. You abandoned your children for a scholarship. The words came out harsh, judgmental. I abandoned an impossible situation. She countered, a flash of the old Diana, the one who could silence a classroom with a look showing through her fragility. I told Stephen I wanted a divorce, wanted to share custody. He refused, said if I left I would never see Emma and Michael again, that his family would fight for full custody and win, that they would tell the children I was mentally unstable. And you believed that? I knew it was true. His father was a prominent deacon in the church, friends with judges and police chiefs. I had no money for lawyers, no family support. My own parents, sided with Stephen, told me I'd made my bed and needed to lie in it. She reached for the glass of water on the side table, taking a small sip before continuing. I made a desperate choice. I took the scholarship and left, planning to establish myself and then fight for my children legally. But Stephen was true to his word. He filed for full custody, immediately claiming abandonment. The court granted it before I could even find a lawyer I could afford. I tried to process this information, to reconcile it with the mother I thought I knew. But the letter said you visited them, sent money. A tear slipped down her cheek. After a few years, when I had my teaching degree and a job, I reached out. Stephen had remarried by then. He agreed to let me see the children occasionally if I signed away all legal rights and if we told them I was a family friend. He allowed me to contribute financially for their education, but only through him, never directly. So you created a whole new family with Dad never telling him about your past. How is that even possible? She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. Portland was a fresh start. I legally changed my middle name to my first name, went from Mary Diana to just Diana. I was careful about not having mutual friends with Thomas who might know my history. Social media didn't exist then. It was easier to compartmentalize your life. The revelation about her name hit me particularly hard. Even her identity had been partially constructed. And Dad, when did he find out? After about 9 years of marriage, Stephen contacted him directly. I never knew exactly what was said, but Thomas confronted me with evidence, photos, letters I'd written to the children that Stephen had kept. I couldn't deny it anymore. I picked up my father's letter, rereading portions. He gave you an ultimatum. Tell me the truth, or he would leave. She nodded, reaching for my hand. I let her take it, though I felt numb to her touch. I was terrified of losing you, Layla. Terrified you would hate me if you knew I had left other children behind. It seemed better to let you believe your father had abandoned us than to risk you discovering I had abandoned them. So you chose to let him go. You chose to let me believe he didn't want me, that he left because family was too much responsibility. The enormity of her deception crashed over me in waves. Do you have any idea what that did to me? How it shaped every relationship I've ever had? My fear of abandonment, my trust issues, all because of a lie you constructed to protect yourself. To protect you, she insisted, squeezing my hand. I made the wrong choice with Emma and Michael. I live with that guilt every day. I couldn't bear the thought of you seeing me that way, as the mother who left her children. Instead, I saw Dad that way. For 24 years, I've carried anger toward him that he didn't deserve. My voice broke. Does he know that I found out? She shook her head. No one knows except you now. And Susan. She helped me when I left Baltimore. I pulled my hand away, standing up. The room felt too small, suddenly the air too thick. I need to process this. I need time. Layla, please. She reached toward me, her face desperate. I know I made terrible choices, but I've spent every day since trying to be a good mother to you, trying to make up for my failures with them. Something in her words sparked a new realization. Is that why you were so clingy, so overprotective? Were you trying to prove you could be a good mother the second time around? She didn't answer directly, but her expression confirmed my suspicion. What about Emma and Michael now? Have you maintained contact? Do they know who you really are? She looked down at her lap. The visit stopped when they were teenagers. Stephen moved the family to Arizona, made it harder. I still sent money for college through their father. Last I heard, Emma is a nurse married with children of her own. Michael is in finance. I haven't seen them in over 15 years. My half-siblings, I said, testing the words. I have a niece or nephew somewhere. Layla. Mom's voice was pleading. I'm dying. The doctors are optimistic about treatment, but the reality is that this type of cancer at this stage, the 5-year survival rate isn't good. Can you try to understand? Can you forgive me before? Don't! I cut her off. Don't use your illness to manipulate my feelings about this. That's not fair. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Perhaps in a way I had. I need to talk to Dad, I said, already pulling out my phone. The real Dad I never got to know because of your lies. What are you going to do? Fear edged her voice. I'm going to hear his side of the story, and then I'm going to decide what kind of relationship I want with both of you going forward. I headed toward the door, pausing only to grab my car keys. I'll be back tomorrow. Take your medication and get some rest. Aunt Susan will be here in the morning. As I drove away, my phone connected to the car's Bluetooth system. My father answered on the second ring. Layla, is everything okay? You never call this time of day. No, I said, turning onto the highway that would take me to the coast, to the small town where he lived. Everything is not okay. I know about Mom's first family. I know why you really left, and I'm coming to see you right now. The silence that followed was broken only by his soft exhale. I'll be here, he finally said. I've been waiting for this day for a very long time. The coastal drive normally calmed me with its sweeping ocean views and dramatic cliffs, but today I barely registered the scenery. My mind raced through memories, recontextualizing every interaction with my parents through this new lens of understanding. My father's modest house sat on a hill overlooking the Pacific, its weathered cedar siding and blue door exactly as I remembered from my few previous visits. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, he was already standing on the porch, hands in the pockets of his jeans, gray hair ruffled by the sea breeze. I took a deep breath before getting out of the car. At 60, Thomas Roberts still had the tall, straight posture I remembered from childhood, though his face bore new lines and his hair had more silver than brown now. His eyes, the same hazel shade as mine, watched me approach with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Layla, he said simply, stepping forward to hug me. I allowed the embrace, but didn't fully return it, my body still rigid with the emotional whiplash of the past 24 hours. Inside the house was exactly what I would have expected from him. Clean lines, lots of natural wood, large windows capturing the ocean view. Architecture books filled the shelves alongside novels and photography collections. A drafting table stood in one corner of the living room, a half-completed set of plans spread across its surface. "Coffee," he offered, already moving toward the kitchen. "Something stronger if you have it," I replied, sinking onto the leather couch. He returned with 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Bourbon. I remember you saying you liked it when we met for your 21st birthday." The fact that he'd remembered such a small detail made my throat tighten unexpectedly. I took a sip, letting the liquor burn a path down to my stomach before speaking. "I found Mom's safe deposit box yesterday. I read your letter. I saw the photos." The words came out clipped, controlled. "I need to hear your version of what happened." He sat in the armchair across from me, rolling his glass between his palms. "I've waited a long time for this conversation, though I never wanted it to happen this way." He sighed deeply. "What exactly do you want to know?" "Everything," I said, "starting with when you found out about her first family." He nodded, gathering his thoughts. "We'd been married 9 years. You were 8. I thought we were happy, though looking back there were signs I chose not to see. Diana would disappear for weekends, teacher conferences, college, friend reunions, professional development seminars. I never questioned it much. She was ambitious, involved in her career. It seemed normal." He took a sip of his bourbon before continuing. "Then I discovered discrepancies in our joint account. Significant sums missing not just once, but regularly over years. When I asked Diana, she was evasive, claimed it was for a surprise, then changed the subject. My suspicion led me to check her email one day when she'd left her computer open." "You invaded her privacy?" I couldn't help but note the irony given my recent actions. A sad smile crossed his face. "Yes." Not my proudest moment. But there I found emails between her and someone named Stephen Barrett, discussing money transfers and arranged meetings. The tone wasn't romantic, it was businesslike, cold even, but clearly regular contact with someone she'd never mentioned. "What did you do?" "I hired a private investigator." He shook his head at the memory. "Again, not something I'm proud of, but I needed to know if my wife was leading some kind of double life. The PI came back with information that seemed impossible. Diana had been previously married in Baltimore, had 2 children, had left them when she moved to Portland for college." "Did you confront her immediately?" I leaned forward, completely absorbed in finally hearing this hidden history. "No, I needed more verification. I contacted Stephen directly, told him who I was. He was surprisingly willing to talk. I think years of bitterness made him want me to know exactly who I'd married. He sent me copies of their marriage certificate, birth certificates for Emma and Michael. And he told me the story from his perspective, that Diana had abandoned them all, had given up her parental rights in exchange for occasional visits under strict conditions." "And then you confronted Mom?" "Yes. She denied it at first, claimed Stephen was making things up to extort money. But when I showed her the documents, the photographs, she broke down. Admitted everything." He stared into his glass. "It was the most difficult conversation of my life. The woman I'd loved for a decade, the mother of my child, suddenly revealed as someone capable of walking away from her own children." I swallowed hard, hearing my own recent thoughts echoed in his words. "The letter I found, you gave her an ultimatum." He nodded. "I couldn't continue the marriage knowing she'd built it on such fundamental deception. But my primary concern was you, Layla. I felt you deserved to know the truth, at least a version appropriate for your age. That you had half-siblings, that your mother had been married before. Diana was adamant that telling you would destroy your relationship with her. We argued about it for days. And when she refused to tell me, you left." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "I told her I wouldn't continue participating in the lie. That if she couldn't be honest with you, I would have to leave because I couldn't bear to see her deceive you daily." I hoped it was a bluff that would push her to do the right thing. His voice grew hoarse. It wasn't. She chose the lie. Why didn't you fight for custody? Why let me believe you'd abandoned me? The questions that had haunted me for decades finally found voice. He set his glass down, leaning forward with intensity. I did fight Layla. I filed for joint custody immediately. But Diana fought back harder, threatened that if I pursued it, she would tell you everything in the most damaging way possible, that she would make you hate both of us. And you believed her. I believed she was desperate enough to do anything to keep her secret. The court initially granted temporary joint custody, but Diana filed motion after motion claiming I was unstable, angry, a risk to your well-being. She had colleagues from school testify about my erratic behavior after leaving all fabricated. He ran a hand through his gray hair, the memory clearly still painful. The court eventually ordered a psychological evaluation for both of us. Diana presented perfectly. She was always good at maintaining appearances. I was struggling, angry, sleep-deprived. The evaluator recommended supervised visitation for me until family tensions decreased. It was a devastating blow. But even supervised visits, why didn't you take them? Why did I only see you a handful of times growing up? Pain flashed across his face. The first few supervised visits were traumatic for you, Layla. Diana had told you I'd abandoned the family, that I didn't want to be your father anymore. You were confused, angry, wouldn't speak to me or make eye contact. The court-appointed supervisor noted your distress and recommended a cooling-off period. I don't remember those visits, I said softly. You were 8, traumatized. The mind protects itself. He continued. After that, I tried to respect the psychological boundaries while staying in your life however I could. Monthly support checks above what the court ordered. Birthday and Christmas cards. I moved to this town to be close enough to drive to Portland quickly if you ever needed me, but far enough to give you and Diana space. You never remarried, never had other children. The question had been lingering in my mind since I arrived, seeing no evidence of another family in his home. No, he said simply. After everything with Diana, I was cautious about relationships, and no other child could replace you. The statement hit me with unexpected force, bringing tears to my eyes for the first time since this revelation began. I blinked them back, needing to stay focused. You said you kept track of me growing up. He stood walking to a bookshelf and returning with a photo album. Friends would send me pictures of your school events. Your soccer coach, remember Mr. Grayson, he'd update me when they saw you accomplishing something. I subscribed to your school newspaper to see your name when you made honor roll. The album contained a chronological record of my life school photos. I recognized newspaper clippings of academic awards, a program from my high school graduation where I'd given the valedictorian speech, even printouts of articles I'd written for my college paper. You were there, I said, the realization dawning. At my high school graduation, I thought I imagined seeing you. I sat in the back, left before the ceremony ended to avoid creating a scene with your mother. But I couldn't miss it. My fingers traced a photo of me in cap and gown, unaware my father had been watching from a distance. Why didn't you tell me all this when we reconnected in college, when I was an adult who could handle the truth? He closed the album gently. I considered it many times, but by then you had established a relationship with your mother based on certain understandings. I didn't want to be the one to destroy that, to force you to reconstruct your entire family narrative. And, he hesitated, a selfish part of me feared you wouldn't believe me, that you'd cut me off completely if I spoke ill of Diana. So you both made choices about what I could handle, what I deserved to know. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Neither of you trusted me with the truth. We were wrong, he said simply. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from your potential rejection. I'm sorry, Layla. The direct apology, the lack of excuses or justifications penetrated my defensive anger. For the first time, I truly looked at the man before me, not as the father who abandoned me, nor as a newly discovered saint, but as a flawed human who had made difficult choices in an impossible situation. Mom is sick, I said after a long silence. Ovarian cancer. The prognosis isn't good. Surprise and then genuine concern crossed his face. I'm sorry to hear that. Despite everything, I would never wish that on her. I don't know how to feel about her now, I admitted. Angry, betrayed, but also, she's still my mother. She's still dying. He moved to sit beside me on the couch, cautiously placing his hand over mine. You don't have to decide everything today, Layla. Complex emotions take time to process. What about Emma and Michael, my half-siblings? Have you ever had contact with them? He shook his head. No. I considered reaching out after everything happened, but decided it wasn't my place. They had their own complicated relationship with Diana. Adding another connection to her life probably wouldn't have helped them heal. We sat in silence for several minutes, the sound of ocean waves breaking against cliffs drifting through the partially open window. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing since I first read the letter. What happens now with us? His hand squeezed mine gently. Whatever you want, Layla. I've missed 24 years of truly being your father. I'd like the chance to try now if you'll let me. But I'll understand if you need time or if you decide this is all too much. Looking into his eyes, my eyes in an older face, I made a decision. I think I'd like to try having a father again. And I think I'd like to know about my half-siblings, maybe even meet them someday. Relief and joy washed across his features. I'd like that very much. As the afternoon turned to evening, we remained talking, filling in 24 years of gaps, asking questions neither of us had been brave enough to voice before. I called Aunt Susan to check on Mom, letting her know I wouldn't be back until morning. For the first time in my life, I fell asleep in my father's house in the guest room. He told me he had always kept ready just in case. In the morning, I would return to Portland to my mother, to the complicated reality of caring for someone whose actions had caused so much pain. I would need to find a way forward that acknowledged both the harm and the love, the deception and the care, the abandonment and the presence. But for now, in this house by the sea with the Father, I was only beginning to truly know. I felt something I hadn't expected, the first fragile tendrils of peace. Not forgiveness yet, that would take more time, but the possibility of it. The acknowledgement that in families there are no perfect heroes or irredeemable villains, only flawed humans trying their best with the emotional tools they possess. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized the fundamental truth that would guide me forward. Sometimes the most profound healing begins not when we find the villain in our story, but when we recognize there never truly was one. 6 months have passed since the day I discovered the truth about my family. Looking back, I realize now that moment was both an ending and a beginning. The death of a narrative I'd believed my entire life and the birth of a more complex, more honest understanding of my parents and myself. My mother's cancer progressed more rapidly than her doctors initially predicted. After a few rounds of chemotherapy that left her depleted without significantly reducing the tumors, she made the difficult decision to stop treatment and focus on quality of life rather than quantity. We moved her into hospice care at home, transforming our living room into a peaceful space overlooking the garden she had tended for decades. Those final weeks were a strange mixture of grief and reconnection. With the barriers of secrets finally gone, we found a new way to relate to each other. I asked questions I'd never dared to before, and Mom, perhaps knowing her time was limited, answered with an honesty that sometimes surprised us both. "Do you regret it?" I asked one evening as the sunset cast golden light across her bed. "Leaving your first family." She was silent for so long I thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "I regret the pain I caused. I regret the cowardice that led me to lie instead of finding a better solution. But I don't regret the life that came after my career, our home, and especially not you, Layla." She died peacefully on a Tuesday morning in early spring, my hand holding hers. My father arrived an hour later, having driven down as soon as I called. Watching him stand in the doorway of the room where his ex-wife lay, his face a complicated mixture of emotions, I realized how intertwined their lives had remained despite decades of separation. He had never stopped being connected to her through me, through the shared history that couldn't be undone even by betrayal. Planning the funeral forced me to confront questions I'd been avoiding. Should I try to contact Emma and Michael? Would they want to know their mother had died? Did they even consider her their mother? After all these years, Dad supported my decision to reach out. "They deserve the chance to make their own choice about attending," he said, "just as you deserve the chance to know the truth." Finding them wasn't difficult in the age of social media and online records. Emma Barrett Thompson was a nurse practitioner in Phoenix, married with 2 children, my niece and nephew ages 10 and 7. Michael Barrett worked for an investment firm in San Diego, recently engaged. I sent them each a carefully worded email introducing myself, explaining the circumstances of our connection, and informing them of Diana's passing. Emma replied within hours, a short, cautious message thanking me for the information and expressing condolences for my loss. Michael took 3 days to respond, his message more detailed, asking questions about Diana's life, whether she had ever spoken of them. Both agreed to attend the funeral, though their messages made clear they were coming for closure rather than to mourn a mother they barely knew. The service was small. Mom's colleagues from school, a few longtime neighbors, Aunt Susan and her family, and me. My father sat in the back, respecting the complicated dynamics at play. When Emma and Michael arrived together, both tall with our mother's dark hair and something familiar in the shape of their eyes, the air in the room shifted. These strangers, who were my blood, who shared half my DNA, who had experienced a completely different version of the same woman. After the service, the 5 of us, me, my father, Emma, Michael, and Stephen, who had come to support his children, sat in a quiet corner of the reception area. The conversation was stilted at first, decades of separation creating a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. "She kept photos of you," I told them, pulling out the picture I'd found in the safe deposit box. "And she sent money for your education, though I understand your father managed it." "Dad told us years ago," Emma said, her fingers tracing the outline of her younger self in the photograph. "When we were teenagers, said she had another family, that she'd chosen them over us." Stephen shifted uncomfortably. "That was perhaps unfair of me. I was angry for a long time." "We all were," Michael added. "It's strange to put a face to the mystery woman from our childhood. The one who would visit occasionally as Mom's old friend Diana, but who we later learned was actually our mother." "She was complicated," I said, finding myself in the unexpected position of explaining the woman who had raised me to the children she had left behind. "Deeply flawed, but also loving in her way. I think she carried the guilt of leaving you every day of her life." "Did she ever talk about us?" Emma asked, vulnerability breaking through her composed exterior. I hesitated, wanting to offer comfort but unwilling to construct new lies. "Not directly. I didn't know you existed until 6 months ago, but looking back, I can see how her fear of abandonment, her overprotectiveness with me, was connected to her history with you. I think she was trying to prove, maybe to herself more than anyone, that she could be a good mother." "At your expense," my father interjected quietly. At all our expense, I corrected, reaching to squeeze his hand. We talked for hours that day, comparing childhoods, noting the strange parallels and divergences in how Diana had mothered each of us. There were moments of tension, of course, but also unexpected laughter, and the tentative formation of a connection none of us had anticipated. Before they left to return to their lives across the country, we exchanged contact information and made cautious plans to stay in touch. Not family yet, that would take more time and trust, but no longer strangers either. In the months since I've been rebuilding my life with a new foundation of truth, I sold my mother's house, unable to continue living, surrounded by memories both true and false. I transferred to my company's Portland office rather than returning to Seattle, wanting to be closer to my father as we constructed our new relationship. We meet weekly for dinner, sometimes at his coastal home, sometimes at my new apartment in the city. Slowly, we're filling in the gaps of our lost years together. He tells me stories of my childhood from his perspective, shares old videos he'd kept of family vacations and birthday parties. I introduce him to my friends, include him in holiday plans, call him when I need advice, or just to share good news. The process hasn't been easy or linear. I still have moments of anger toward both parents, Mom for her deception, Dad for allowing it to continue even when I became an adult. Therapy has been essential in processing these complex emotions, in understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean excusing harmful actions, but rather freeing myself from the weight of resentment. My relationships with others have shifted too. James and I reconnected first as friends, and then gradually as something more. He says he always sensed there was more to my family story than I acknowledged, that the reconciled version of me feels more authentic, more present. We're taking things slowly, both aware of how my new understanding of my parents' relationship has made me both more cautious and more committed to honesty. Emma, Michael, and I exchange emails regularly. We've had several video calls, awkward at first, but growing more comfortable as we discover shared traits. Emma's laugh is startlingly similar to mine, and Michael and I share the same analytical approach to problems. We're planning a visit next month, a long weekend at a neutral location where we can continue getting to know each other without the shadow of our mother's choices looming quite so heavily. The most unexpected development has been my father's careful friendship with Stephen. Two men who loved and were hurt by the same woman who raised her children in separate worlds, finding common ground in their shared experience. They speak occasionally, comparing notes on parenting adult children, on rebuilding after betrayal. It's a strange connection, but one that somehow feels right in our unconventional family. As for me, I'm learning to hold contradicting truths simultaneously, that my mother loved me deeply while being capable of abandoning others. That my father protected me in ways that also hurt me. That family bonds can be both broken and reformed across decades of separation. The compass pendant my father gave me at graduation hangs around my neck daily, now a reminder that finding my way doesn't mean following a straight path, but rather navigating the complex terrain of truth with compassion for others and for myself. There are still unanswered questions, still moments of grief for the family relationships I might have had if honesty had prevailed from the beginning. But there is also gratitude for the chance to build something new from the fragments of what was broken. I no longer spend energy trying to identify the villain in my family story. I've come to understand that we were all both victims and perpetrators in different ways. My mother of her own traumatic upbringing, and the limited options it afforded her; my father of his conflict between truth and protection; me of my unwillingness to question the narrative I'd been given even as an adult. What matters now is not assigning blame, but creating meaning from our shared history. Finding ways to move forward with greater authenticity and deeper connections. This is the unexpected gift that emerged from painful revelation. The opportunity to build relationships based not on comfortable illusions, but on the messy, complicated truth of who we really are. If you've stayed with me through this story, I hope it might encourage you to examine the narratives in your own life, to question the roles you've assigned to family members, to consider whether there might be deeper truths waiting to be discovered. Sometimes the most powerful healing begins when we're brave enough to look beyond the stories we've been told and seek understanding of the complex humans behind them. Please share in the comments if you've ever discovered a family secret that changed how you viewed someone important in your life. How did you handle it? What helped you move forward? And if you found this story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that family healing is possible even after decades of misunderstanding. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and I wish you courage on your own path to truth and reconciliation.